Okay. Hare Krishna, dear devotees, please accept our humble obeisances. All glories to Jagat Krishna Prabhupada, all glories to Guru Dev, all glories to Samud Vaishnavi devotees, and all glories to our revered speaker for today, His Grace SRIVAS VANACARI, who needs no introduction because he is one of the fathers of this platform, and he is one of the main brains behind why we are here today. And he's been so generous and kind, being with us, giving us his love, wisdom. And sometimes, even when he is not speaking, he comes in to also hear others speak, which is very encouraging. So, Prabhuji, again, we're very much grateful to have your association today. And without further ado, we may put the verse on the screen and you take it over from here. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Narayana namaskritya narachaiva narottamam devim sarasvatim vyasam tato jayam mudhirayet nashta prayasa badresu nityam bhagavatam sevaya bhagavati uttamasloke bhakti bhavati naistiki. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. So we are reading from SRIMAD BHAGAVATAM, Canto 2, Chapter 10, Text 26. Nirabidyata shishno vai prajanandarmitarittinaha upashta ashit karmanam priyam tat ubhayasrayam. Nirabidyata shishno vai prajanandarmitarittinaha upashta ashit karmanam priyam tat ubhayasrayam. Nirabidyata shishnovai prajanandamritatinaha upashta ashit karmanam priyam tat ubhayasrayam. Word for word translation. Nirabidyata came out. Shishnaha, the genitals. Vai, certainly. Praja Ananda, sex pleasure. Amrita Atinaha, aspiring to taste the nectar. Upashtaha, the male or female organ. As it came into existence. Karmanam, of the lustful. Priyam, very dear. Tat, that. Ubhaya ashrayam, shelter of both. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada. Translation. Thereupon, for sexual pleasure, begetting offspring, and tasting heavenly nectar, the Lord developed the genitals, and as there is the genital organ and its controlling deity, the Prajapati, the object of sexual pleasure and the controlling deity are under the control of the genitals of the Lord. Purport. The heavenly pleasure for the conditioned soul is sexual pleasure. And this pleasure is tasted by the genitals. The woman is the object of sexual pleasure, and both the sense perception of sexual pleasure and the woman are controlled by the Prajapati, who is under the control of the Lord's genitals. The impersonalists must know from this verse that the Lord is not impersonal, for he has his genitals, on which all the pleasurable objects of sex depend. No one would have taken the trouble to maintain children if there were no taste of heavenly nectar by means of sexual intercourse. This material wealth is created to give the conditioned souls a chance for rejuvenation, for going back home, back to Godhead. And therefore, generation of living being is necessary for upkeep of the purpose of creation. Sexual pleasure is an impetus for such action, and as such, one can even serve the Lord in the act of sexual pleasure. The service is counted when the children born of such sexual pleasure are properly trained in God consciousness. The whole idea of material creation is to revive the dormant God consciousness of the living entity. In forms of life other than the human form, sexual pleasure is prominent without any motive of service for the mission of the Lord. But in the human form of life, the conditioned soul can render service to the Lord by creating progeny suitable for the attainment of salvation. One can beget hundreds of children and enjoy the celestial pleasure of sexual intercourse, provided he is able to train the children in God consciousness. Otherwise, begetting children is on the level of the swine. Rather, the swine is more expert than the human being because the swine can beget a dozen piglets at a time, whereas the human being can give birth to only one at a time. So one should always remember that the genital sexual pleasure, the woman, and the offspring are all related in the service of the Lord. And one who forgets this relationship in the service of the Supreme Lord becomes subjected to the threefold miseries of material existence by the laws of nature. Perception of sexual pleasure is there even in the body of the hawk, but there is no sense of God consciousness. The human form of life is distinct from that of the hawk, from that of the dog, by the perception of God consciousness. Om Gyana Timiridasya Gyanan Gyanashala Kaya Chakshuram Militam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Sri Chaitanya Manobistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Yukta Padakamalam Sri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragunastam Vitam Tam Sanjivam Sadvetam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Sri Vishakam Vitamsya Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishnaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Tirtha Swami Iti Namine Namaste Krishna Padaya Prabhupada Ashri Tatmane Shri Gaura Karuna Shakti Bhakti Tirtha Namine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishnaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharini Nirvise Sashunyavadi Pasachade Satarini Vancha Kalpatarvyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namini Gauratvize Namaha Nityanando Vatutendo Vasuda Pranavalabaha Janavir Jivita Patir Krishna Prema Prabhu Padmavati Sutta Srimam Sanchirananda Purvaja Bhavum Mata Jagat Rakta Rakta Gora Kile Varaha Advaitam Harinadvaita Racharyam Bhakti Shamshanat Bhaktavataram Itam Sam Advaita Acharya Shraye Panchatattvamakam Krishnam Bhakta Rupa Sarupakam Bhaktavataram Bhaktakyam Namami Bhakti Shantikyam Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nanda Gopa Kumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha Nama Pankajanavaya Nama Pankajamaline Nama Pankajanetraya Namaste Pankajagraye Namo Brahmanya Devaya Go Brahmana Hitaya Cha Jagaritaya Krishnaya Govindaya Namo Namaha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopita Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Jayatam Sarato Pango Mama Madirgatima Sarvaswa Padam Pujo Radha Mandana Mohano Divyar Vindaranya Kalpadrumada Srimad Ranadgara Simhastanastau Srila Govinda Devo Prishyalimi Sevya Manosmarami Srimam Rasa Rasaram Vivam Sivata Tatastita Karusan Venuswanai Gopi Gopinata Sriyestunaha Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Bindavanishwari Brisha Banusute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Devi Krishnamai Prokta Radhika Paradevata Sarva Lakshmi Mai Sarvam Kanti Samohini Paraha Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Translation again. Thereupon, for sexual pleasure, begetting offspring and tasting heavenly nectar, the Lord developed the genitals. And thus, there is the genital organ and its controlling deity, the Prajapati. The object of sexual pleasure and the controlling deity are under the control of the genitals of the Lord. Mukam karoti vachalam pangum lagayate grim yat kripatamahan bande Shri Guru Dina Taranam Paramanam Madhavam Sri Chaitanya Ishwaram Akanda Mandalakaram Vyapta Inachara Charam Tatpadam Dashitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. So first of all, we'd like to welcome everybody to today's discussion. And before we proceed to say something for our own purification and probably for the benefit of the audience, we seek the blessings of all the Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis who have assembled here so that we can say something meaningful for our own progress and maybe for the progress of the assembled Vaishnavas, for the pleasure of the assembled Vaishnavas. So in this verse, Shukadeva Goswami is describing how the universal form, Virat Rup, is manifesting the different aspects and simultaneously the universal arrangement is taking place. If you read from from 10 or so, it describes the different organs that were manifested in the universal form. And as a result, the living entity was gifted with specific sense objects. I think from from 13, it says, the Lord, while lying on his bed of mystic slumber, generated the seminal symbol, golden in hue, through external energy out of his desire to manifest varieties of living entities from himself alone. In 14, it says, just hear from me how the potency of his lordship divides one into three, called the controlling entities, the control entities, and the material bodies in the manner mentioned above. In 15, he says, from the sky situated within the transcendental body of the manifesting Mahavishnu, sense energy, mental force, and bodily strength are all generated, as well as the sum total of the fountainhead of the total living force. In 16, he says, as the followers of a king follow their lord, similarly, when the total energy is in motion, all other living entities move, and when the total energy stops endeavoring, all other living entities stop sensual activities. In 17, he said, the living force, being agitated by the Virat Purusha, that is the universal form, generated hunger and thirst, and when he desired to drink and eat, the mouth opened. In 18, he says, from the mouth the palate became manifested, and thereupon the tongue was also generated. After this, all the different tastes came into existence, so that the tongue can relish them. In 19, he says, when the supreme desire to speak, speeches were vibrated from the mouth. Then the controlling deity fire was generated from the mouth. But when he was lying in the water, all these functions remained suspended. 20. Thereafter, when the supreme Purusha desired to smell odors, the nostrils and respiration were generated. The nasal instrument and odors came into existence, and the controlling deity of air carrying smell also became manifested. 21. Thus, when everything existed in darkness, the Lord desired to see himself and all that was created. Then the eyes, the illuminating God's Son, the power of vision, and the object of sight all became manifested. In 22, it says, by development of the desire of the great sages to know, the ears, the power of hearing, the controlling deity of hearing, and the objects of hearing became manifested. The great sages desire to hear about the self. 23, when there was a desire to perceive the physical characteristics of matter, such as softness, hardness, warmth, cold, lightness, and heaviness, the background of sensation, the skin pores, the hairs on the body, and their controlling deities, the trees were generated. Within and outside the skin is a covering of air through which sense perception became prominent. In 24, it says, thereafter, when the Supreme Person desired to perform varieties of work, the two hands and their controlling strength, Indra, the demigod in heaven, became manifested, and also the acts dependent on both the hands and the demigods. In 25, thereupon, because of his desiring to control movement, his legs became manifested, and from the legs, the controlling deity named Vishnu was generated. By his personal supervision of this act, all varieties of human beings are busily engaged in dutiful occupational sacrifice. Then, today's verse 26, it says, thereupon, for sexual pleasure, begetting offspring, and tasting heavenly nectar, the Lord developed the genitals, and thus there is the genital organ and its controlling deity, the Prajapati, the object of sexual pleasure, the controlling deity are under the control of the genitals of the Lord. So the universal form, Virat Rupa, is gradually manifesting the various organs on the body of the Virat Rupa. Because without manifesting the various organs on the Virat Rupa, it is not possible for the living entities to have those organs. So therefore, the Virat Rupa, in order to allow the living entities to exist in the material world, to exist on the various planets, and to perform various activities, the Virat Rupa manifested different organs, manifested different aspects of the body, and correspondingly, the living entities also had these organs and different parts of their bodies manifested. So in this particular verse, it's talking about the manifestation of the sexual organs that the universal form is considering the pleasures that the living entity will experience in its activities. The living entity has to engage in procreation. The living entity has to increase and multiply. So the Lord has to think of that, and by thinking of that, then his genitals became manifest. And as his genitals become manifest, then automatically the living entity also has these organs manifesting in him. So whatever is happening in the universal form also happens in the living entity. As we read in one of the verses, it says, so long as the universal form is active, the living entities are also active. When the universal form suspends all activities, then also the living entities also suspend all activities. So it means the living entities are actually controlled by the universal form of the Lord. Whatever is happening with the universal form, any activity, any manifestation is actually meant for the benefit of the living entity. And so the universal form is simply facilitating the material life, material existence, material manifestations of the living entities. So Srila Prabhupada begins his purport by saying that the heavenly pleasure for the conditioned soul is sex pleasure. And this pleasure is tasted by the genitals. So there are various types of pleasures. There are various types of states that a living entity experiences in its material life. And one of those pleasures is this sex pleasure. And just as there are different organs for tasting different pleasures, the living entity can only taste sex pleasure with the genitals. So the genitals are so designed that they give the highest pleasure. So it describes here heavenly pleasure. The genitals are so designed that it gives the highest pleasure as far as material experiences are concerned. The Bhagavatam mentions apam viryasya sagrasya prajnanyasya prajapate pumsha shishna pushtastu prajanta ananta nirvitehe. That from the Lord's genitals, semen, generative rains, and the procreators were generated. And it says his genitals are the cause of pleasure for the living entity. In other words, it is said that the Lord arranges a very special type of cells, a very special type of sensation, a very special type of covering of the genitals that gives some special taste. And why is the Lord doing this? Because the purpose of material creation is to give the living entity a chance to function in the material world. And how can the living entity get a chance to function in the material world if he does not get a body, if he is not born? So because the living entity has a desire to function in the material world, the Lord has to make the necessary arrangement to serve as an impetus for sexual pleasure that will give rise to procreation. So it is said that the genitals and the pleasure of begetting contrast the distress of family encumbrances. In other words, the pleasure one gets from sex life is so intense that the trouble one has to go through in bringing forth children, in cultivating them, bringing them up, training them, educating them, whatever is involved, even though it's so difficult, but the pleasure, the heavenly pleasure of sex life overrides that. It is so strong that a living entity does not care for the consequence. He doesn't care for the encumbrances. He doesn't care for the trouble that he's going to meet. So it is said, one would have ceased to generate children altogether if not for the grace of the Lord, who coated the genitals of the living entity with such cells, with such covering that produces so much pleasure that the trouble of procreation is very insignificant. Comparatively, the pleasure one gets from sexual involvement as compared to the trouble one has to go through the process of procreation is so intense that the living entity does not care for the consequence. So it is a design by the Lord to bring about procreation, to bring about the manifestation of the living entities in the material world. Because living entities, they need bodies. Living entities, they need to manifest in the material world in order to experience the material world. So therefore, one can bring forth as many children as one wants, not because he wants the children, but because he wants the pleasure. So therefore, to bring forth children, there is a responsibility. The spiritual values of life can be realized in the human form. For the animals, they also go through the same sexual experiences, but there is no purpose of their procreation. They are not procreating their children to become God conscious, to become elevated and go back home, back to Godhead. They don't have that program. That facility is not there. But in a human society, procreation means bringing forth responsible children. And these responsible children, they would become God conscious by training, and they would take advantage of the human form of life, and they would go back home, back to Godhead. So this sex energy, this taste for sex is actually coming from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is called the Adiras. Adirasasya Janma Yatra. There are all kinds of mellows, rasas with the Lord, the living entity has with the Lord. But among all these rasas, the Adiras or conjugal relationship is supermost. So in this conjugal relationship, there is intense relationship, intense love, intense feeling, very spiritual. It is not material. As Krishna Das Kaviraj describes it in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Radha Krishna Pranaya Vikti Haladini Shakti Asmat Kadmano Api Bhuvi Pura Deha Bedam Gato. So the loving affairs between Radha and Krishna are so intense. They are so transcendental. They are so absorbing that Radha and Krishna, even though they were one initially, they have decided to become two so that they can exchange these loving feelings between them. So initially, Radha and Krishna was one. A cow, a Katmanu, it was one. But then because of the exchange of feelings, they became two. And now, since they have become two, they can exchange this adiras, this conjugal affairs, and enjoy themselves unlimitedly. That is a spiritual aspect of adiras, or conjugal affairs. And so, when the living entities enter the material creation, that adiras has to be created. A perverted adiras has to be created. And so, sex life in the material world is the perverted adiras, is the perverted conjugal relationship between Radha and Krishna, between Radha and the gopis. And so, this is purposely done so that the living entities in the world, in the material world, there will be an impetus for them to create other living beings, for them to provide bodies for the souls that are coming into this material world. So, in the material world, we accept sex as the highest pleasure. In the heavens, in the middle planetary systems, in the lower planetary systems, among the demigods, among the demons, among human beings, among other species, sex life remains the highest pleasure. Why? Because the Lord has created a very special covering, special coating of the genitals that produces that pleasure. And the purpose of doing that is to facilitate procreation. The SRIMAD BHAGAVATAM describes sex life as the rubbing of two hands. Yanmaitunadi grihamedi shukam hi tukam kanduyamena karayo ivaduka dukam tripyanti neha kripa bahu duka baja kandutivam manashiyam veshiteha diraha. The sex life is compared to the rubbing of two hands to relieve an itch. The Grihamedis, or so-called Grihastas who have no spiritual knowledge, think that this itching is the greatest platform for happiness, although it is actually the cause of distress. The Kripanas, or the fools who are just the opposite of Brahmanas, are not satisfied even by this repeated sexual enjoyment. But those who are Dhira, who are sober, they can tolerate this itching and are not subjected to the sufferings of this material world. So as mentioned, the trouble that comes along with sex is so huge. But for the living entity to tolerate this trouble, to accept this trouble, the Lord coated the genitals of all living entities with some special cells, special coating. So one who can tolerate the itching. So normally sex life means some friction. So this friction is compared here to a rubbing of hands to release an itch. But an itch is never released or relieved. The more you itch, the more you feel like itching. The more you scratch, the more you feel like scratching. So therefore, we see that mankind has engaged in sex life 1,000,000 times, but is never satisfied. It's like an itch. The more you itch, the more you want to itch. And this itching produces a lot of trouble. This itching produces a lot of distress. But because of the pleasure associated with it, the living entity thinks of the pleasure, he does not think of the distress associated with it. But great personalities like Yamuna Acharya, he said, he expresses himself in the following verse. It says, Yadavadi mama cheta Krishna padara vrinde, nava rasa damodaya ratam asit, tadavadi batandran sangame smaryamane, bhava mukha vikara susti nivishtam staha. The since I have been engaged in the transcendental loving service of Krishna, realizing ever newer and newer pleasures in him, whenever I think of sex pleasure, I spit at the thought, and my lips curl with distaste. So Yamunacharya was formerly a great king who enjoyed so much sexual pleasure with so many queens, but eventually he gave up that mood of enjoyment and became a mendicant. And when he became a mendicant and began to increase his attachment to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then he began to experience a different dimension of pleasure. And so he transcended this itching of rubbing hands. He transcended this material itching that cannot be stopped. And now when he looks back, the way he used to live and the way he's living now, when he thought of sex life, he became disgusted. So Krishna consciousness is a process by which we can gradually rise above this itching. This itching will always be there. And there is no amount of itching that will stop the itching. One cannot be satisfied by sex life. There is no question about it. One just have to stop it. One just have to forget about it because it will always be there. So long as you have a material body, the itching will always be there. And so one should engage in sex life for the purpose of procreation. As Krishna himself says in Bhagavad Gita, that sex life, which is not against religious principles, I am that sex life. So in other words, one can utilize sex life as service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that's why Prabhupada is mentioning in the purport that human beings, they can utilize sex life for salvation, whereas the animals cannot. Because through sex life, a number of children can be born and they can be trained, they can become devotees, and in this way, sex life becomes glorious. Such glorious that a Naistiki brahmachari like Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada said that if I can bring forth children that will become pure devotees of the Lord, I am ready to engage in sex life 100 times a day. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada said that if one can produce pure devotees, one can produce elevated devotees through sex life is also a way of preaching. He is ready to engage in sex life in order to produce God-conscious children. Because the human form of life is the only means by which one can escape. So therefore, producing human beings, producing bodies for souls on the human platform is actually service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As it is mentioned that the human form of life, Manushyam Artandam Anityam Apihadira. The human form of life is a great gift by which one can escape this material existence. But you cannot get a body unless there's a father and there's a mother. And the father and mother cannot produce a child unless they engage in sex life. So therefore, sex life becomes necessary for a man and a woman, and it should be done with the aim of producing a child. And then a child is trained up as a devotee to take up Krishna consciousness, and then he is promoted to the spiritual world. If that is the case, then sex life becomes service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the purpose of the Lord manifesting his genitals in order for the living entity to also have a genitals, and then the Lord giving a special coating to the genitals. The purpose of all this is to facilitate the living entities going back home, back to Godhead, by getting a human form of life. And so if we are able to utilize this opportunity to bring about the salvation, to bring about the liberation of many, many souls, that is very glorious. Otherwise, sex life will simply bind everyone to the material world because it's the most pleasurable thing. It's described here as heavenly pleasure. It would keep everyone in the material world. And actually, it is said that that is the shackles that keep every living entity in the material world is sex life because of the intensity of the pleasure involved. And so Prabhupada mentions in the purport, demonic people, they use what they call it, sex control, pregnancy control. They don't want children. They call it family planning. They use drugs. They don't want children. They only want to enjoy the pleasure associated with sex life, but they don't want the responsibility. Srila Prabhupada says that is not God consciousness. It's the highest contamination, it's the greatest contamination to use family planning methods just to check pregnancy, meanwhile enjoying the benefit God has given to the living entity. That goes along with the responsibility of bringing forth children. So in order to do this, one has to associate with highly elevated personalities. By association with highly elevated personalities, one will gradually cultivate Krishna consciousness, cultivate the taste of Krishna consciousness, and then that taste of Krishna consciousness will replace this heavenly pleasure of sex. So the main purpose of associating with devotees is to develop a higher taste. When one develops a higher taste, then one can gradually give up this heavenly pleasure of sex, and then one can become fixed in Krishna consciousness, and one doesn't have to accept another body again, because this pleasure keeps the living entity bound up in this world. We have to come again and again to accept material bodies just because we want to enjoy this heavenly pleasure. But according to Yamuna Acharya, when one develops a higher taste in Krishna consciousness, sex doesn't appeal anymore. Just like we see in the case of Pingala. Pingala is described in the 11th canto of the SRIMAD BHAGAVATAM. She was a prostitute, and she used to stand on the roadside waiting for men. She was selling her body for money, for survival. And that is her profession. For a prostitute, she has to sell her body. She has to engage in sex with all kinds of men, good men, bad men, handsome men, ugly men, rich men, poor men, all kinds of men. So this Pingala, at a point, she realized that she was misusing her life. So she made some statements. She says, Aho me moho vitatim pashanti jitat manaha ya kantat asta karmam kamaye yena balisaha. Just see how greatly illusion I am. Because I cannot control my mind, just like a fool, I desire lusty pleasure from an insignificant man, and I'm being cheated every moment. Then he said, Santam samipe brahmana rati pradam, vita pradam nityam imam vihaya. I am such a fool that I have given up the service of that person who, being eternally situated within my heart, is actually my most dear friend. That most dear friend is the Lord of the universe, who is the bestower of real love and happiness and the source of prosperity. Although he is in my heart, I have neglected him. Instead, I have ignorantly served insignificant men, trying to please them and please myself, but I'm never satisfied. Then he went on to say, Aho mayadma prati pato vrita, sanketa vrityati vigrahaya vartaya. Oh, how I have uselessly tortured my own soul. I have sold my body to lusty, greedy men, who themselves are objects of pity, thus practicing the most abominable profession of prostitution. I have hoped to make money and make sex my pleasure, but I have become so miserable in this profession. So these are the lamentations of a prostitute who was so much involved in this activity of the heavenly pleasure. So it means that it's actually not the heavenly pleasure. It means actually it's a source of misery. But until we come to a certain level and realize that this so-called pleasure is actually the means of entanglement, is actually the source of all the trouble. So one wants to stay away from it. One wants to do away with it so that one can think and meditate and chant the holy names of Krishna. And that is why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared in this age to give out this facility of the holy name. Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami says, Vande Sri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Tam Karunanavam Kalo Api Asti Godeyam Bhakti Yena Prakishitam. That in this age, the only medicine that can give the living entity a higher taste is the holy name. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, out of his costless mercy, Devam Tam Karunanavam. Karunanavam means out of his costless mercy, he has descended, he has appeared in this world to offer the living entity the opportunity to chant the names of Krishna, experience higher pleasure, and give up this attraction to the heavenly pleasure or sex life, and then get out of the material world. So we are so fortunate that somehow or the other we are all associated with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement, and therefore, and we take the chanting very seriously, and we apply ourselves seriously to this process of Krishna consciousness, we can develop a higher taste, and we can give up this attachment. We can give up this heavenly pleasure. We can fix our minds on the nectar coming from Krishna's name, Krishna's form, Krishna's activities, which are all spiritual. Krishna Nam, Krishna Gun, Krishna Lila, Krishnera Sarupa, Sarvachit Ananda. Everything associated with Krishna is Chit Ananda, transcendental bliss. That is what we are actually looking for. But the Lord has kind of deceived us. Let me use that word, deceive us with this coated pleasure on the genitals. And the living entity is captivated by that coated pleasure on the genitals. And he's so much into it. And we see today sex has become so pervasive. Sex has become the controller of the world. Nothing happens in this world without sex. And that is the misfortune of the living entity. Sex is actually meant for procreation. Sex is not meant for pleasure. It's not meant for recreation. It's meant for procreation. And because procreation is very, very troublesome, because procreation is distresses, so the pleasure is a compensation to allow the living entity to procreate. And when we procreate, we have to be responsible to make sure that the offspring that we are bringing into the world, they all become devotees of the Lord. And then sex life becomes service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Krishna is kind to us. He has given us the facility of sex life, heavenly pleasure, but he has also given us the facility of Krishna consciousness, and the choice is ours. So if we want to go this way, the choice is ours. If we want to go that way, the choice is ours. But if you want to go the heavenly pleasure way, then we must be ready to produce children. We must be ready to train them on Krishna consciousness. We must be ready to have them liberated. And then that sex life becomes service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Otherwise, we just have to turn our back to it and just concentrate on chanting the names of Krishna, hearing the glories of Krishna, increasing our love for Krishna, increasing the taste of Krishna consciousness, and forgetting about this heavenly pleasure so that we can go back home, because the purpose of this material creation is to facilitate all the living entities back home, back to Godhead. And that is the purpose of this manifestation of the genitals of the Lord, and the manifestation of the genitals of the living entity, and then the coating of the genitals with these very sensitive cells that produces such scintillation and keeps us busy in this world, thinking that we are actually enjoying, but we are prolonging our stay in the material world. So thank you very much. I think my 1 hour is already gone. So if there are any comments, they are welcome. If there are some questions, they are also welcome. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Prabhuji, for delivering this. I don't know how to. It's a very, very complex and sensitive, delicate subject matter, but I appreciated the way you dealt with it. But I don't know about others, but that does not deprive me from asking some questions. But before I do that, devotees, if anyone may have questions, comments, realizations from what we've heard from this act, one may share or speak. But Hassan, please, you may unmute.
Hare Krishna, dear Guru
Hare
Maharaj.
Krishna, Dr. Hassan.
All glory to Srila Prabhupada and all glory to you.
Hi,
All glory
all
to
grace to
Master
Srila
Plays.
Prabhupada, all grace to Guru Dev.
Thank you for the wonderful class, and I'm very, very happy to hear from you for a very long time.
Hare Krishna, happy to hear from you too.
Yes. Guru Maharaj, in your lecture, you mentioned something about the pleasure that which the sexual intercourse which Krishna gives us for procreation, and because of that, it comes with a very
Heavy
great
task.
suffering.
Yes.
So you mentioned that Krishna expanded himself with rather so that he can enjoy this pleasure. So
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so this means that Krishna do the same thing like we do, and how did that happen? Like because if for us is to for procreation, for Krishna, what does it gain for doing that? This is
Thank
my
you.
question, Krishna.
Thank you. I think I didn't clarify myself well. What I'm saying is that the adiras is said to be the original relationship, and that is conjugal. This conjugal love, which gives satisfaction to the Supreme Lord and his devotees, is actually not sex life as we understand it. Srila Prabhupada writes the perverted aspect of this conjugal love is what we experience in the material world as sex life. But in the spiritual realm, it is not sex life. The Lord enjoys his internal potency in such an extremely wonderful way that we can imagine. But the living entity also wants enjoyed that way, but it's not possible in the material world. So therefore, the Lord arranged to give us this sex pleasure, which is said to be a perverted, just the opposite of what is going on in the spiritual world. So Krishna does not really engage in sex life as we are doing here, but there is an exchange of love. There is an intense exchange of love between Radha and Krishna, because Radha is the internal potency of Krishna. So there's that intense exchange of love that Krishna enjoys, and Radha also enjoys, but it's not carnal sex. They don't engage in sex life. So we cannot compare our experience of the heavenly pleasure with what is going on in the spiritual sky. Even Srila Prabhupada writes that in Vaikuntha, there are marriages. If a man and a wife are so attached to each other in devotional service, it is possible they can continue their marriage in Vaikuntha planets, but there is no sex life there. There is no sex life in Vaikuntha. As for the Goloka Vrindavan, there are no marriages. There are no marriages in Goloka Vrindavan. In Goloka Vrindavan, the relationship, the highest relationship is Parakiya Ras. Parakiya, no marriage. In Vaikuntha, there is Swakiya. Swakiya means there is marriage. So, but Krishna and Radharani, because they are one originally and they separate, so they can exchange loving relationships. They experience that intense love. which is described as the perverted experience we are getting here. Here, a man has to contact a woman, or a woman has to contact a man in order to experience the pleasure. But in the case of Radharani and Krishna, they don't really need to contact each other. Even at their distances, wherever they are, Krishna can receive the pleasure from Radharani, Radharani can receive the pleasure from Krishna. They don't really need to come together. Of course, sometimes they come together, but sometimes they're not together, but they still experience the same loving feelings. So our love, our experience is different from what is going on between Radha and Krishna, from what is going on between Lakshmi and Narayan. They are different. But we can only say that a glimpse of that experience is what is we are experiencing in sex life. The height of orgasm, the height of sex life, that if you multiply that 1,000,000 times or a trillion times, then you can be thinking of the pleasure they experience by exchanging their love. But their love is not based on physical contact, is not based on sex life, is not based on any carnal pleasure. But at the same time, there is an exchange of activities, exchange of love, exchange of feelings that fulfills their desires. So we have to understand there is a difference. There's a difference between sex life, and there's a difference between conjugal love, between Radha and Krishna, between Lakshmi and Narayan. They are completely different.
Thank you so much, Guru Maharaj. Thank
Hare
you so
Krishna.
much. I'm very, very satisfied. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Well, Hare Krishna. Thank you for that deep question, Dr. Hassan. And it's gracious, VANACARI. Thank you for the answer. Anyone else with something to ask, to share? Well, Prabhuji,
Hare Krishna.
yeah,
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna, Prabhu, yes, please go ahead.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare
Dandava
Krishna.
Pranam
Hare
to you.
Bol. Janava
All
Pranam.
glories to you. All
All
glories to
glories to
Gurudev, and
Prabhupada.
all glories to Prabhupada.
Jai, Jai, Jai.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you for your in-depth explanation. But I heard that you said that sex is meant is in this world specifically for procreation.
Yeah.
But we understand that is it in the fifth country? I think fifth country. The descent of it's either fifth country or sixth country. The descent of Ganga into on this planet. Yeah, if you read it, it explains how this Bhumandala, the middle planetary system.
Yes,
that
Bhumandala.
it has eight verses.
Yeah.
And that the other verses he explains how the higher ones there is so much pleasure and they are considered, they are said to be heavenly kingdoms.
Yeah.
And that kingdoms you can have unlimited sex, nothing and everything can go on, but you don't even procreate.
That's
until
right.
the time that you are about to leave your body.
Yeah, that's the
And if
demigod
you
style.
decide, then if you decide to, so if it's specifically meant for procreation, then how come that in that environment they don't have to do it for procreation?
Well, you see, heavenly planet means a place of enjoyment. That is for sure. Heavenly planet means a place of enjoyment. And so everything that we experience in the middle planetary systems or in the lower planetary systems is much more exaggerated, much more multiplied in the heavenly planets. So yes, sex life is meant for procreation. That's the main reason that the Lord arranged it so that we can produce physical bodies, material bodies for the living entities seeking human forms for elevation. But in the heavenly planets, they don't bring forth many children like we do in the middle planetary system. And also their way of bringing forth children is also different from our system. They bring forth their children at the end of their lives. That is true. So therefore, they have the opportunity to engage in sex life even before they bring forth children. So we can say that the demigods, they are given that opportunity because they're in a heavenly planet. They have a much more opportunity they have created a specific karma, punya, for enjoying long life, enjoying unlimited sex, enjoying so much pleasure, healthy bodies, fragrant bodies. They have all kinds of facilities in the heavenly planet that we do not experience here. And even it is mentioned that because of this unlimited sex life in the heavenly planet, the people who engage in jihad, their idea is to go into the heavenly planet to marry 100 virgins, so that they can engage in unlimited sex life. So we can understand that since sex is one of the greatest pleasure in the material world, so if somebody qualifies to go to heaven, then we must understand that in the heavenly planet, he is going to have more of what we are experiencing here over there. So it is part of the package of the heavenly planet that they produce their children at the end of their lives, but before then, they still engage in sex life. That does not mean that it is mainly for pleasure. No, they have the control when they should have children, and normally their children comes when they're about to leave. They produce children when they're about to leave, but still they engage in sex life. So your argument is sex life is not only for procreation, sex life is also for entertainment. That is your argument. But Srila Prabhupada mentions in the purport again and again that the sex life is mainly for the purpose of producing bodies to facilitate the journey of the soul, not one's physical bodies, to make advancement. So that is why the Lord provided this facility so that the living entities can procreate. In fact, there is a verse in the 3rd canto talking about the manifestation of Manu and Satarupa. Even it says it bewilders Brahma. Brahma is the father of all the living entities. How Manu and Shatarupa manifested from the body of Brahma is amazing. It is mysterious, actually. It's very mysterious. Brahma himself cannot understand. So we can see that is the Lord himself, because that was the beginning of sex life. At the beginning of creation, Brahma was creating living entities from different parts of his body. He created some from his legs, created some from his arms, created some from his mind, created some from his head, created some from his chest, created some from his buttocks, created some from his back. Every part of Brahma was creating living entities. And he also asked Lord Shiva to create. When Lord Shiva was born, Rudra, out of the anger that the Kumaras were not ready to get married, he also authorized him to procreate. And Lord Shiva started procreating, but his living entities he was procreating were destroying the creation. So Lord Brahma stopped him. Then again, he came back to square one. He had to struggle to create. So it dawned on him that let me create a man and a woman. And through sex life, they can produce children. So as Brahma was thinking about this, all of a sudden, 2 living entities appeared, one from his right, one from his left. and one of them had a beard, and one of them has breast. So Brahma was wondering where from these people. But mysteriously, a man and a woman appeared from Brahma. So it is understood that because the Lord wanted to use sex life for the purpose of procreation, he manifested the genitals and also helped to manifest Shatarupa and Manu from the body of Brahma. And that is the beginning of sex life. So Manu and Shatarupa, they are the original father and mother who engage in sex life. And from these two, all the world population has come. So we can say that sex life is for procreation. When Brahma was struggling to increase the population, universal population, he was trying on his own by many ways. He was not succeeding until Swayambhuva Manu and Shatarupa were manifested, and then they began to procreate by sex life, and through them, the whole universe was filled up. So we can say that the purpose of sex is for procreation. But the living entities in the heavenly planet, because they have earned a lot of pious credits, and they are actually meant to go and enjoy their pious credits. And when they're exhausted, they come back. So part of the pious credit is to enjoy this heavenly, and it's also described as heavenly pleasure. They have to enjoy this heavenly pleasure as part of their pious credits. But we have to understand that the purpose of sex life is for procreation, and that is why Manu and Shatarupa were manifested from the body of Brahma.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much. But I was not even thinking about it being for pleasure, but I was trying to put two things that you said together.
Okay.
That how Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was saying that if he could produce so many children for the service of the Lord, pure devotee, then
Yeah.
you will be ready to produce
Yeah.
as many children as he wants to produce.
Yeah.
And now, so in that sense, I was understanding that maybe if somebody does that, if somebody engages in sex life, then the state of consciousness that the person uses whilst having the sex, that is the more determining factor.
That's true.
That is important. So
Yeah, that's a fact.
when you mentioned that is for procreation, then I also was, that's the reason I was referring to this heavenly kingdom. This, and even where that particular verse where it was mentioned about this heavenly enjoyment of sex life, if you read the purport of the same verse, the purport,
Yeah.
Srila Prabhupada also says that sometimes there is sex life in the spiritual world, but it's not for procreation. Yep.
I see. I've not come
Yeah.
across it.
Yeah, but he says it's not for procreation because he says there is no birth. He said in the spiritual world there is no birth. So the purport, when I read that purport, then I was like, well, maybe so. The only thing I'm trying to connect with it is that the state of consciousness that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was mentioning, that if that thing is used for the service of the Lord, then it's acceptable. Unlike, because he says in the material world, the lower you go, the more dull your consciousness is,
Yeah.
the more children you want to give, the more children sex life gives to you. So in that purpose, La Prabhupada was explaining how in the animal kingdom, that is the reason why they indulge in sex life to get more and more kids. But as you go up the ladder, then if even they engage in sex life, it's not specifically meant for procreation, because the amount of procreation they do in that higher realm is limited. They what do I say? They give birth to very limited children.
Well, whatever the situation may be, from Brahma's point of view, Brahma was having difficulty in increasing the world population or the universal population. So Brahma thought that the best way to increase the population is through sex life. And so he manifested Manu, Swayambhuva Manu, and Shatarupa as the first couple. And from that, in fact, when Brahma manifested that, then they took over the procreation through sex life. And it is said the whole universal population came through Shatarupa and Swayambhuva Manu. So it means that the purpose of husband and wife, of marriage, of sex life, is to increase the universal population. So that is the main reason. But according to different locations, different planetary systems, we do not expect that it's going to be the same throughout all the whole universe. There will be different gradations, different standards, different situations altogether. So there's no doubt about that. And we know that the demigods, they don't bring forth their children from the beginning. They bring forth their children at the end. So does that mean they don't engage in sex life? They do. But we have to see it as part of the credit, part of the piety they have created, that to the enjoyment, the pleasures that they are supposed to experience in the heavenly planet. And so it's a package that they experience. But nevertheless, the main purpose of creating man and woman by Brahma is to facilitate procreation.
Hare Krishna. Shama Varaha Prabhu, please, you may unmute.
Dandavat Pranam Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna Varahaji. All glories to Krishna Prabhupada.
Sri Guru and Gauranga, all glories to you.
Hare Krishna. Bless you too.
Good to hear from you again today. Just one point I want to clarify on this. When we talk about, of course, Swayambhuva Manu and Shatarupa are the first husband, man and woman, husband and wife. But then usually when we talk about Manu, we talk about 14 Manus in one day of Lord Brahma. And these Manus were supposed to be, all of them, responsible for procreation. But then from your statement, when you said Shatarupa and Swayambhuva Manu, the first couple, maybe the first couple, but in what space are they the first couple, for how long? Because that will be going in line with the Bible of Adam and Eve, which does not answer many questions. But then actually, in the Vedas, when we hear that the Manus in one day of Brahma, there are 14. So they are responsible for the procreation. So it kind of, satisfies people's mind that there's not just one couple, engaged in the procreation. So can you please throw some more light on that?
Yeah, thank you, Prabhuji. The Manus, yes, there are 14 Manus in the day of Brahma. And it's the Manu, they're more or less like government, universal government. Every Manu comes along with his sages, 9 sages. Every Manu comes along with the different kinds of demigods. Every Manu comes along with an incarnation of the Supreme Lord. So, and they have a period of time they have to stay. And so in a day of Brahma, we have all these various Manus. In fact, I think the 11th canto, he gives a list of the 14 Manus in the day of Brahma. He gives the list of the Manus. He gives the list of the Indras. He gives a list of the sages. He gives a list of the incarnations of the Lord for each Manu. So, but the first Manu is Swayambhava Manu. That's the first Manu. Other Manus followed, but the first one is Swayambhava Manu. And so he did his part. He brought forth 5 children, 2 boys and 3 ladies. The 2 boys as Priyavrata, he's a senior, and Uttanapat is a junior. Then we have the 3 girls, what do they call them? The wife of Daksha, and the wife of Ruchi, and the wife of Kadarmamuni. They are the 3 daughters. So it is said that from these 5, 3 girls, okay, some of the girls were married to the Segis, but from these 3 girls and two boys, the universal population has come, because from them the other personalities took their birth. So even though a number of Manus also came later, but it is Swayambhava Manu and Shatarupa who set the ball rolling, and along the line, some Manus also became manifested. The first Manus were created by Brahma, but the other Manus were not created by Brahma. They took birth from the descendants of this Swayambhava Manu. So if the Bhagavatam mentions the parents of the various Manus, how they were born, it is mentioned. So only Swayambhava Manu and Shatarupa, they appeared without any, father and mother bringing them forth. Brahman just manifested them. So yes, all the Manus, they contributed, they participated in the expansion of the universes, of the population of the universe, but the original Manu, the first Manu, is Brahma, is coming from Brahma, is Shatarupa and his husband.
Swayambhava.
Yes. So they are the original. And when their term of office was over, they pack aside, they move aside, and then the next Manu took over. When that is over, they move aside, and the next Manus take over. So that has been going on from the onset of creation. And so in the day of Brahma, we had 14. And in the year of Brahma, there are so many. And in the life of Brahma, there are so many. They are unlimited. And they're all contributing to the universal management. They're all contributing to the universal population. But the original Manu is Swayambhava Manu.
5,040 Manus in Lord Brahma's 1 year.
1 year, that's right. 5,004.
5,040. Yes.
5,040 in Brahman's year.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Then the second point, this is about the main subject, about sex life.
Yeah.
Of course, the subject is about the genitals of the Lord and its function and how it correlates with the living entities also having the same organ function.
Yeah.
However, when we talk about sex life in the spiritual,
Shima Prabhu, there is a lot of noise created by microphone.
okay, is a wind.
Okay,
Yeah. So when we talk about spiritual sex,
much better, yes.
or sex in the spiritual world, it is a different connotation, a different idea altogether.
Yeah.
And we are supposed to also understand that for our own spiritual advancement. In fact, Bhagavatam says, well, this other aspect of it is what I want to talk about. Somewhere in the Bhagavatam it is mentioned that for the purpose of creativity, to be able to have the empowerment for creativity, Many factors are needed. And one of those factors, I think 13 factors, and one of them is woman. There must be a woman in order for creativity to take place. I mean, we're not talking about procreation now, we're talking about creative energy. Creative energy. And quite often when we talk about sex life, we're only talking about the physical contact and the procreation and so on and so on. But sex life or sexual energy has a spiritual aspect, which most people do not know and did not understand. And without that sexual energy, you cannot have creative power. You cannot even succeed, in creativity. So just what I want to contribute is that this sexual energy, or what some other people call feminine energy, is so important. It's so important for spiritual evolution or evolution in general. And we have to see beyond that the genital is not just meant for giving sexual pleasure, but it has a subtle role, a subtle impact in our development, far above just the physical, rubbing and the pleasure that is associated with that. If one is able to tap into that subtle sexual energy and the way to utilize the feminine energy, then it becomes not just a genius, but it becomes spiritually very powerful. And I had Gurudev spoke about this once, saying that even a sannyasi has to use his sexual energy for spiritual development, which means that the sexual energy is not something to be looked down upon or to be detested, but is to be able to see how to use that spiritual side of it, which is very powerful. It gives life, it gives energy, it gives inspiration, it enthuses, it gives joy. And if you know how to tap into that, then you will really understand that God has a higher purpose for the genital and the sexual energy more than just for procreation. So that's just my contribution. I want to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think I've heard Guru Maharaj talk about these things a few times in his lectures. And I want to say that the pleasure potency, Ladini Shakti, this Ladini Shakti is the feminine energy. Is a feminine energy, and it nourishes the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and it also nourishes the living entities. So as you said, and we know how to tap into that energy, it doesn't matter whether you are a grihasta, you are a brahmachari, you are a sannyasi, vanaprastha. If one can tap into this Ladini Shakti, he can do many wonderful things. The energy of creativity, yes. So, but it's a very subtle thing. It's a very, very advanced scientific method that how to channel or to connect or to, link up with that Ladini Shakti. But naturally, it says as we perform bhakti, Srimati Radharani is the embodiment of that Ladini Shakti. So Srimati Radharani nourishes everyone, especially those engaged in bhakti. Srimati Radharani nourishes everyone, but to the degree of purity, to the degree of, abstinence, then we can get connected to this feminine energy coming from Srimati Radharani. So this is just to buttress your point that yes, this feminine energy is so important spiritually and even materially. They often say for every successful man, there is a woman. Yeah. That is a feminine energy. And similarly, for every spiritual pleasure, spiritual experiences, this feminine energy has to be tapped into. And that is why Srimati Radharani is so crucial in the life of a devotee. If one can kind of link into her energy, link up with her energy, one can perform so many wonderful feats because of that feminine energy. So thank you for that contribution.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Shrimad Prabhu, and His Grace Srivas Vanacharya. Thakur Prabhu, please you may unmute.
Okay, Krishna,
Hare
it's
Krishna.
at my obeisances. I'll go to Srila Prabhupada. And as usual, thank you for your presentation. It cannot be overstated. So quickly, Krishna says sex life that is based on religious principles, that's number one. Two, the so-called little pleasure we get is a sort of bonus because, the whole aspect of, pregnancy and, the whole pregnancy and everything. And so if you didn't have any sort of, in other words, you just go have sex and have children, people would not really want it because there is no incentive. So you just get a little pleasure from it. Okay, and also in terms of regulating our energies, basically. Okay, so and also for the human form of life, what says that if you want to have children, it has to be regulated. Also, it says that in the you go to the stages brahmacharya, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyas. So sometimes it's regulated, so you're not going to be having it all the time. So there are times that you're going to be having children, but Krishna calls us children. Yes. So you're someone that regulating. Yes, not necessarily suppressing, regulating. So it's important. But the incentive first, materially, is that you get a little pleasure from it. But as Krishna says, sex life, that's based on religious principles. Yes? But we take it that, as a matter of fact, we say it's recreation, but it's relates procreation. Yes? Yes, so that's my understanding. Yeah. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for sharing. I don't know if His Grace Srivas Vanacharya, you want to say something in regards to what Thakur Murari Prabhu shared. Is he just giving a comment and his understanding of this sex energy as explained by Krishna himself?
Well,
Otherwise, we'll go to Madhuvan Prabhu.
yeah, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, it says what? It says, Karmosmi Bharata Sama, that I am sex life, which is not opposed to religious principles. So what is religious principles? It means surrendering to the Supreme Lord. And so if one is engaged in sex life for the purpose of serving the Lord, it means following religious principles. So any sexual activity that is meant to serve the Lord, Krishna says that's sex life. But if we engage in sex life, which is not meant for serving the Lord, then Krishna does not accept that sex life as himself. So sex life has to be there because it is the means of procreation. It is the means of giving physical bodies to the living entities that want to have material experience. So, so Krishna is saying that if you engage that energy for his service, then he's not different from that activity. It's not material, it is spiritual. So if we want to engage in sex life, then we should do it with a consciousness that we are doing this for Krishna's pleasure. And how do we do it for Krishna's pleasure? By having some nice children, by training them up, and by making sure that they become devotees. Then your sex life becomes very meaningful. That is what I can say.
Hare Krishna, thank you. Madhavan Prabhu, please, you may unmute.
Hare Krishna, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna, Madhavan Prabhu. Nice to see you.
My pleasure, Maharaj.
How is Ibadan?
Ibadan is peaceful, Maharaj. It's
Good.
peaceful. We are trying our best. I'm trying our best. Thank
All right.
you very much for giving us your time, your energy, and enlightening us more about the scripture.
Thank you for giving the opportunity also.
And the instructions about sex life appears to be very, very confusing. It's about the most confusing instruction. And when we look at the life of the four Kumaras, which are the firstborn of Lord Brahma, they refused to go into sex life.
Yeah.
To the extent that Lord Brahma was very, very angry. Because what Lord Brahma once said was to populate the entire universe. But unfortunately, even his firstborn, they were defiant. And they did it without any remorse.
Yeah.
You know? That's why I said the instruction. And then also, when Krishna said our sex life in accordance to that is not contrary to religious principles, that is the sex life. If sometimes if we engage in sex life and we have we procreate, it's not 100% sure that those children will become conscious because they are different living entities and they have their own karma, their own life. You can only try your best in making them grow conscious. So that's another confusion also, which I mean, you can say. So we can see how this instruction, even when Lord Brahma, will not instruct even his children in this regard. And like Prabhupada stated, someone who wants to pursue a spiritual life or liberation is not going to concern himself about the sex life. And in this material world, the highest level of sense gratification is sex. So, Maharaj, maybe you agree with me that this instruction is somehow very
very confusing.
Very complex.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's true. But the clear thing is that, you see, the case of the Kumaras, before Brahma created the living entities, he actually created 5 principles of ignorance. Tamisra, Tamisra, Moha, Mahamoha, and Tamas. These are the 5 aspects of niscience. They are called the 5 coverings of ignorance that is necessary to keep the living entity in the material world. So since the living entity wants to enter the material world, Brahma had to create a dress, 5 layers of dress that would make him forget Krishna and forget his spiritual identity. So these 5 layers were created first from the shadow of Brahma. So after Brahma did that, Prabhupada says it's a thankless task. Brahma knew the consequence of that 5 layers of ignorance. He knew he's going to condition the living entities so much. So in that contemplation, Brahma created the 4 Kumaras. So when Brahma created the 4 Kumaras, he was thinking about these 5 layers of ignorance that he has created that will condition the living entities. So the 4 Kumaras were like a circle, like a follow-up to that particular, because they were the firstborn. It's like Brahma had created a conditioning situation. He had created a situation that will entangle the living entities. So in Brahma's mind, he was thinking, how am I going to counteract these 5 layers of ignorance I've created? How would the living entities get out of these 5 layers of ignorance? So as he was contemplating of this, then he created the 4 Kumaras. So the 4 Kumaras, they were actually manifested out of Brahma's spiritual mind. They were created out of Brahma's spiritual thinking. And so they were different. From their birth, they were not interested in anything material. So it is said that actually the Kumaras, they are described as Satyavesha avatars. They are empowered living entities. They were empowered with the 5 elements of liberation. Tyaga or Vairagya, renunciation. Yoga, Gyan, knowledge. Yoga, meditation. Vairagya, detachment. And Sankhya, analytical study. So the 4 Kumaras, they represent the 4 elements of liberation: Sankhya, Vairagya, Yoga, and Gyan. So because they are Satyavesha avatars, they have been manifested to provide knowledge, to provide yoga, to provide renunciation, to provide Sankhya, so that the living entities may gradually get out of these 5 types of ignorance, or 5 layers of ignorance that Brahma had earlier on created. So the Kumaras, they were empowered at birth with these things. And so naturally, they were not inclined to marriage. So when Brahma ordered them to get married, they told Brahma in the face, no, Daddy, we are not interested. And of course, Brahma became angry, and then out of that anger, Rudra was born. So the case of the Kumaras is clear, that they have to become torchbearers of knowledge, torchbearers of renunciation, torchbearers of yoga, torchbearers of Sankhya, in order to enlighten the living entities, to educate the living entities who are accepting these 5 layers of ignorance. Tamisra under Tamisra, Moha under Mahamoha, and Tamas. They had to get free of this. And so these 4 aspects is required, and the Kumaras represent these 4 aspects of liberation. So there shouldn't be any confusion, because they are created just for the purpose of nullifying the 5 layers of ignorance. And sex life in general, as we understand from Prabhupada's purport, one can utilize sex life for procreation. One can utilize sex life as service to the Lord, provided one has the right consciousness to bring forth good children and train them up in Krishna consciousness. If one can do that, then Krishna said that sex life It is not different from me. Otherwise, better to stay away from it. Because there is a responsibility in accepting sex life. And if one is not ready to execute a responsibility, then better you stay away. So there is no confusion. So the Kumaras, they didn't want to get involved in that responsibility. They've already accepted the responsibility of sharing knowledge, of sharing yoga, of sharing Sankhya, of sharing renunciation. So they were satisfied with that, and they remained brahmachari for the rest of their lives. But we cannot all follow the Kumaras. So we can utilize sex life as service to the Supreme Lord. And that is, we can produce children and we can train them up in Krishna consciousness, and we can make them devotees. And that would be very glorious.
Thank you very much, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Well, Hare Krishna. Thank you, devotees, for your questions. It seems we've been here for almost 2 hours, so we probably may have to bring this to a close. But I had lots of questions. I had to forego my questions for other devotees to ask their questions. So I've enjoyed and learned a lot from the questions and the answers given herein. And with that being said, if no one has any more question or comment to make, then we may call it a day today. Tomorrow, by Guru Krishna's grace, is the appearance day of Lord Nrsimha. So we hope we all prepare our minds and our hearts to receiving the Supreme Lord tomorrow for our own protection. The Supreme Lord, Lord Nrsimha Dev, is specifically in charge of giving protection to the devotees of the Lord. So we all can cry up to him. Protection from the Lord does not simply mean protection against external demons, but also internal demons. The demons of our own minds and our hearts. And we pray the Supreme Lord may kill them, just like the way he slain Hiranyakashipu. So we are going to try to prepare our minds and hearts to receiving the Lord. And with that being said, His Grace Srimad VANACARI, if you may have some sort of concluding words to make, you may do that before we bring this to a final close.
Thank you. Thank you, Sadhya Prabhu. Thank you, all the devotees, for giving me the opportunity to share these few points. It's always wonderful to be in your midst, trying to churn the ocean of SRIMAD BHAGAVATAM. SRIMAD BHAGAVATAM is endless. It's very deep. And we can spend our whole life churning this ocean. And the jewels that come out of this big ocean, great ocean, are just wonderful. So keep churning the ocean, keep participating in this Krishna consciousness, and guaranteed the future is very bright. Our destination is wonderful. And as Prabhu said, let's prepare our minds for tomorrow. Tomorrow is the appearance of Lord Nrsimhadev, the most wonderful Lord who appeared just to protect his devotee. So again, thank you for the opportunity, and we look forward to having your association again in the future. On that note, we say Hare Krishna and happy Narasingha Chaturdarshi. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much. Hare Krishna. So On this note, we're going to humbly request all the devotees to kindly unmute, and we all chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra to express our appreciation to our revered speaker, His Grace Srivas Vanacari. Jai. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare. Ancha kalpa taripasya kripas Idana
Namo Namaha.
Srivas Vanacari ki.
Jai. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Srivas Vanacari. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna, Hare Chakra Prabhu. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Hare Krishna.
You are always here to give us your association. I mean, it can't be better than this. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure sharing.